Hello, this is Economic Performance, Section D, Inflation, RAR. Lecture. Our prioritized standards, Economic Standard 46. Objectively, we're going to distinguish between the different types of inflation. Inflation is a sustained increase in the average price level of the entire economy. So these blue periods are periods of inflation. As you've noticed, we've had quite a few of those of late. While deflation is a sustained decrease in the average price level of the entire economy. So those are those red periods that we occasionally see. Deflation is not good either. We're usually more concerned with inflation because, well, it's more common. But deflation is also bad. At some level, you might think, doesn't that mean prices go down? Yeah, it does. But it also means your wages go down too. So that's also not good. Ideally, you want a very low inflation rate is the ideal. Now, inflation causes the prices of goods and services to rise and the purchasing power of the dollar to decrease. So the more inflation you have over time, it actually causes what you can get with your dollar to go down over time. Inflation happens when aggregate demand increases faster than your aggregate supply. That's usually what causes inflation to take place. So spending is increasing at a much faster rate than production is increasing. Now, inflation creates uncertainty because it actually affects different groups differently. So inflation actually affects consumers' standards of living. So let's say you got a 5% raise with an inflation rate of 1%. So what happens to that purchasing power? Well, you have to use a tough mathematical operation. It's called subtraction. So 5 minus 1 means your purchasing power has increased by 4%, which means you got 5% more money this year than you did the previous year. But because of 1% inflation, it means you are only going to have a 4% boost in your ability to purchase things. But if you receive, let's say, the same 5% raise, but this time with an inflation rate of 8%, what's going to happen to that purchasing power this time? Again, we use a tough mathematical operation called subtraction. So if you take 5 minus 8, that means your purchasing power has decreased by 3%. So you see, because of that higher inflation rate, even though on paper you make 5% more, you actually can get 3% less than you did the previous year. Now, I should point out, the economy can usually adapt to gradually rising prices, but whenever you have high, unpredictable inflation, this can have very negative side effects on the economy, like tending to result in increases in interest rates on loans, as a for instance. Now, economists classify inflation into two general categories based on the cause. One type, demand pull or cost push. Now, one type you can have is demand pull inflation. Now, this type, which is the more common type, occurs when total spending rises faster than total production. Or in other words, your aggregate demand increases at a faster rate than your aggregate supply. So based on the aggregate supply shifting to the right, it pulls prices up to a new higher price level. Demand pull, because demand's causing it and it pulls it up. Clever. Now, demand pull inflation may result from expansive monetary or fiscal policies. So those are things the government can do that might actually cause prices to go up, or possibly from expectations of businesses and consumers that prices will rise in the future. So the expectation the prices might go up actually causes people to spend money in a way they might not normally spend it, which causes prices to go up. Now, the other type is cost push inflation. And with cost push inflation, this occurs when increases in the overall cost of making and selling goods and services actually raise the price level. So the cost have made it difficult to produce at the level that businesses used to produce. So aggregate supply actually declines. And by declining, it shifts to the left. By shifting to the left, the now higher costs have pushed prices up now to a higher level. It's clever because costs are causing prices to be pushed up. Oh, funny. Now, cost push inflation may result from the effects of monopolization or from supply shocks. Should point out, cost push is a lot worse for the economy overall than demand pull inflation. Now, regardless of the cause, inflation is monitored in the economy predominantly through the Consumer Price Index, or CPI for short, which is a measure of the average change over time in the price of a fixed group of products that is calculated and reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS, each month. Now, what the BLS does, rather than measuring the price change of all products, they actually will select a market basket. So a market basket is a representative sample of commonly purchased consumer items. So this gives you an idea of some of those things that are included in the CPI. Biggest portion of it are going to be housing prices. Food and beverage, transportation are going to be large parts of it. Medical care is a sizable bit. Education, communication, sizable bit. And then there's other ones too. But basically the logic is you account for things like food, clothing, shelter, utilities, transportation, entertainment, healthcare, things that a common consumer are going to be spending their money on. Now, CPI is also not a perfect measure of how inflation affects individual households. For instance, some households spend a larger percentage of their incomes on things like gasoline or groceries than possibly some other families. So if you're spending a lot of your money on this, well, only 15% of CPI is based on this. So if you spend more than that, then it's not going to demonstrate as well how inflation affects you. Or transportation. So if gas prices go up a lot and you spend a lot of money on your transportation cost, then again, CPI might not reflect that quite as much either. Now, the inflation rate can actually be calculated using CPI using this equation. So inflation is equal to CPI 2 minus CPI 1 divided by CPI 1. So basically what that would probably mean, take the CPI if we're trying to determine what the inflation rate is at the end of this year. So the CPI for 2018 subtracted by the CPI for 2017. And then once we get that number, we take that and divide that by the CPI of 2017 again. You might get a number that might be difficult to understand. You just multiply that number by 100 and it'll put in that form for you. All right, that concludes economic performance. Section D, inflation, RAR. Our prioritized standard was Economic Standard 46, and objectively now I can distinguish between the different types of inflation.